key I never should have found. I've always been an introvert, so when I had the chance to move to a small rural town after my divorce, I took it without thinking twice. The house was a 70s brick ranch style, severely outdated and sitting on 10 acres surrounded by dense woods. It was the kind of silence I craved, until the first night I realized just how alone I actually was. On the 7th night it started. At exactly 1:17 a.m., I heard a slow, broken whistling coming from the woods. It wasn't a bird or the wind. It was a rhythmic, off-key tune that felt too intentional. I checked the yard with a flashlight. Nothing. But the next morning, I found the basement door slightly ajar, even though I knew I'd locked it. I found a box of old journals in the attic. My grandfather, who lived here before me, wrote about the same whistling. He'd dealt with it for over 10 years. Then, a text from a no-caller ID popped up on my phone. "I see you're up. Can you check the garage?" My stomach dropped. I realized the cameras the previous owners left weren't for insurance. They were still active, and someone was watching me through them. I grabbed a kitchen knife and walked toward the hallway. The whistling started again, but this time it was coming from inside the house. I saw a figure in black standing perfectly still at the end of the hall, their pale face just watching me. I screamed, "Don't move," but they darted toward the front door with heavy, stomping footsteps. I fired a shot into the dark as they disappeared into the trees. The police found no signs of a break-in, but they did confirm one thing: the front door was unlocked again. Whoever that was had a key to my house. I switched the locks that same hour and moved out a week later. I'm in a city now, but every time I hear someone whistle in the distance, my heart stops. The 3 a.m. customer at pump number 4. I used to work the graveyard shift at a 24-hour gas station on the edge of town. It was the definition of a dead-end job, literally. Most nights were just me, the hum of the refrigerators, and the occasional trucker. I actually liked the silence. It felt like I was the only person left on Earth. At exactly 2:45 a.m., an old, rusted white van pulled up to pump number 4. The engine didn't sound right. It was more like a rhythmic grinding of metal. A man stepped out, but he wasn't wearing shoes. He was barefoot in the middle of October, staring directly at the security camera with a wide, frozen grin that didn't reach his eyes. He walked inside, his wet footsteps slapping against the tile. He didn't buy anything. He just stood at the end of the aisle, facing the milk fridge, and began muttering my full name under his breath. I don't wear a name tag. My stomach twisted as I realized he wasn't looking at the milk. He was looking at my reflection in the glass. I retreated to the back office and checked the monitors. On camera 4, the van was empty, but the man was now sprinting, not walking, around the perimeter of the building at an impossible speed. He then stopped right in front of the employee entrance, his face pressed against the glass, his mouth wide open as if he was screaming, but I couldn't hear a sound. The handle of the back door began to rattle violently. Then came the banging, heavy, deafening thuds that made the frame shake. I grabbed a box cutter, the only weapon I had, and dialed 911. By the time the police arrived 5 minutes later, the van was gone. The only evidence left were 2 bloody handprints on the window of the office where I'd been hiding. The police found no signs of a break-in and told me I probably just saw a drifter on drugs. But they couldn't explain how he knew my name. I quit the next morning. I work a 9-to-5 office job now, but I never stay past sunset, and I never ever stop at a gas station after dark. The tally marks on the pine tree. I needed to clear my head after a rough month, so I drove 4 hours into the Montana wilderness. I found a spot that wasn't on any official maps, a small clearing surrounded by ancient pines. I wanted to be alone, but as soon as I stepped out of my truck, I saw it. An old, moldy tent already sitting in the center of the clearing. I walked over and called out a hello, but there was no response. The tent smelled like something had died inside. On the ground next to it was a small notebook. I flipped through the pages and my blood ran cold. It was filled with hundreds of tally marks, grouped in 7s. Someone had been counting days out here for over 8 months. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m. I heard it, the sound of multiple sets of bare footsteps circling my tent. Then the whispers started. It sounded like 3 different voices just 20 feet away, discussing something I couldn't understand. I gripped my rifle, my hands shaking, and yelled that I was armed. The footsteps suddenly sprinted away into the dark. At sunrise, I unzipped my tent and saw that the moldy tent was gone, not a trace of it left. But on the pine tree right next to my truck, there were fresh cuts in the bark, 7 new tally marks, and hanging from a low branch nearby was a dead squirrel, tied up with fishing line like a warning. I didn't wait. I threw my gear into the truck and floored it. As I was reversing out of the narrow trail, I saw 3 figures standing perfectly still in the tree line, just watching me leave. They didn't wave. They just stared with blank, hollow expressions. I never called the police because honestly, what would I even report? Some marks on a tree. But I haven't gone back to those woods, and I don't think I ever will. Every time I see a tally mark now, I wonder if they're still out there, counting the next person who wanders into their clearing. The gift inside, my shopping bag. It was late November, and I was at the mall doing some early Christmas shopping. The vibe was great, decorations everywhere, that festive feeling in the air. I had just finished buying a few things at Sephora and Zara when I decided to sit on a bench near the tall tree to collect myself before heading home. An older man, maybe in his 60s, sat down next to me. He reminded me of a skinny Santa Claus. He was friendly enough, cracking jokes and showing me a picture of his daughter on his phone, claiming I looked just like her. I didn't see the resemblance, but I just smiled, said goodbye, and walked to my car. I was just about to pull into my driveway when my phone buzzed. A notification appeared. AirTag found moving with you. Panic hit me instantly. I drove past my house, looping around the block. I made the AirTag play a sound, and my heart dropped when I heard a faint beeping coming from inside my Sephora bag. Someone had dropped it in there while I was on that bench. I threw the AirTag out of the window and floored it back home, locking every door. But 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang. 3 loud, distinct knocks. A muffled voice from the other side said, "Hey, Ashley, I think you might have my AirTag." He knew my name.
I know you're in there.
He had used the tag just long enough to find exactly where I lived. I turned on the TV to drown out the silence, staring at the window. Suddenly, I saw him. He was standing right outside, his face pressed against the glass with a wide, frozen smile. He tapped on the window and whispered, "I love it when they play dumb. Don't pretend you don't know I'm watching you." The police arrived, but he was gone. They found no footprints, no evidence. I moved out a few days later, but I'm not the same person I was. I check my bags every time I leave a store now, and I never, ever answer the door for a stranger. Because I know he's still out there somewhere, waiting for his next daughter to find. The Trap on Route 82. I was working an unusual logistics job, hauling electronics through the Southwest. It was around 1 o'clock in the morning on a desolate stretch of Route 82 in New Mexico. If you've never driven there at night, it's hard to describe how isolated it feels, the kind of road where you only see another car every 30 minutes if you're lucky. I rounded a bend and saw a red hatchback pulled onto the gravel shoulder with its hazards flashing. A woman was standing next to it, holding her phone high in the air as if searching for a signal. My first instinct was to drive past, but I thought about my own sister and how I'd want someone to stop if she were stranded. I slowed down and cracked the window. She rushed over immediately, trying my passenger door handle, which, thank God, was locked. She claimed her car had died and she needed a ride to a gas station. Her voice had this jittery, slightly slurred quality that made my stomach knot up. I was about to unlock the door when I glanced at her car one more time. A man stepped out from behind it, where he'd been hiding the whole time. Then, another figure stepped directly into the road 50 feet ahead of me, holding something long. Maybe a bat or a pipe. They were hurting me. Survival instinct took over. I floored it, swerving around the man in the road. The woman inside inside the car started screaming and digging through her purse. I drew my own firearm, resting it on the steering wheel so she could see it. She froze and stopped talking instantly. I forced her out at the next truck stop 30 minutes later. After she was gone, I inspected the passenger seat. Buried between the cushions, I found a burner phone battery and a sealed pack of heavy-duty zip ties. I don't even want to think about what they had planned. Being armed that night may have very well saved my life. The thing that visited us both. When I was little, my parents used to send me to my grandparents' farm in Pennsylvania for 2 weeks every summer. The house was an old 3-story building surrounded by 40 acres of mostly woods. I always went the first 2 weeks of July, and my cousin Francisco went the last 2 weeks of August. I slept in the attic room. During my second summer there, I started hearing soft footsteps on the stairs at night. One night, I woke up because my bed was shaking. I could see a dark outline of someone standing at the foot of my bed. When I told my grandpa, he just said the house was old and made noises. The experiences continued. I'd find my closet door wide open in the morning, even though I knew I'd shut it. I started going to sleep earlier, just to avoid being awake for whatever was happening. My mom laughed it off, telling me I had an active imagination and that Francisco never complained about anything. Years later, after my grandparents passed away, I saw Francisco at the funeral. We hadn't talked in years, but I decided to ask him about the farm. I told him about the figure at the foot of my bed. He didn't laugh. He looked at me with a blank expression and said, "That's nothing. That thing used to touch me." Francisco told me he'd feel the mattress sink down like someone was sitting there. Then he'd feel rough, scratchy fingers tracing his face. He kept his eyes shut for years, pretending to sleep just to stay alive. He told his mom, but she got mad at him for lying, so he just stopped talking about it. To this day, I don't know if it was a person living in my grandparents' house without them knowing, or something else. Knowing that we both shared the same nightmare confirms that we weren't crazy. We were just being watched. I still can't sleep in old houses without looking at the foot of my bed. The third note under door, 302. I used to travel a lot for work and usually stayed in cheap but decent hotels because I didn't care about anything except having a bed and a shower. This happened during a training event in a small city in Pennsylvania. I checked into a regular-looking hotel with depressing red carpet and a smell that reminded me of my grandma's house. When I opened the door, the room looked a little messy, like housekeeping had rushed or just didn't care. A lamp was tilted, and the blanket had a small wrinkle, as if someone had sat there recently. I ignored it and tried to sleep, but I woke up at 2 a.m. to a soft sliding sound. Something small and white was sticking out from under the door. I picked up the note. In messy, uneven handwriting it said, "Someone is watching you from inside the hotel." I locked the chain and sat on the bed. 20 minutes later, another note slid through. This one said the person had been inside my room before I arrived and they liked watching people sleep. Then I heard a quiet breathing sound, not mine, coming from near the closet. I saw the closet door, which I knew I'd left open, was now slightly closed. Suddenly, the door knob began to turn slowly. Someone was sliding a key into the lock. I grabbed my bag and bolted out, catching a glimpse of a shadow stepping back around the corner at the end of the hall. I ran to the front desk, but the employee looked half asleep and confused. The manager eventually checked the room with me. Everything looked normal again, but the window lock was broken in a way that looked recent. Later, a different staff member mentioned they hadn't had a housekeeper on staff for a week because the previous one just stopped coming in, but she still had her master keys. The hotel claimed no cameras caught anything, but I never went back. I often think about that third note I never mentioned. It said, "I am already inside the room with you." To this day, I check every corner and every closet before I even put my bag down in a hotel room. Someone has been living under my feet. I moved into my first house about 8 months ago. It's a decent-sized place, but the highlight was the basement. a massive maze-like space with separate rooms partitioned off with plywood. I mostly used it for storage, only going down once a week to do laundry. Since I live alone and work from home, the silence of the house was usually my favorite part, until the thumping started. It started with small things. I'd find the basement light already on, even though I was sure I'd turned it off. Then I noticed a strange smell near the back storage room. Not rot, but like a locker room or a place where someone hadn't showered in weeks. One afternoon, while moving some boxes, I found a pile of candy wrappers and half-empty water bottles tucked behind the furnace. I tried to tell myself it was just mice, but then I found the nest. Behind a stack of old boxes, someone had dragged out rolls of old insulation and used them as padding for a makeshift bed. My heart dropped when I saw a phone charger plugged into the outlet down there. I wasn't alone. I stood frozen. And then I heard it. The sound of heavy, rhythmic breathing coming from the dark corner behind the water heater. I fumbled for my phone to use the flashlight, but before I could, the basement lights flickered and went out completely. I turned to run toward the stairs, but something grabbed my ankle with incredible strength. I kicked wildly, connecting with something solid, and scrambled up the wooden steps in total darkness. I burst through the door and slammed it shut, pressing my entire weight against it as someone started thundering up the stairs from the other side. The police arrived 15 minutes later. They searched the entire basement and found a small window that had been forced open from the outside. While the man was gone, they found something in his nest that made me sick. A digital camera filled with hundreds of photos of me, cooking, watching TV, and even sleeping in my own bed. He had been coming up into the main house while I was asleep for weeks. The intruder was never caught, but the police found food wrappers and more bottled water behind the furnace, proving he'd been there for a long time. I moved out a month later. Now, I live in a modern apartment with no basement, but every time I hear a floorboard creak, I wonder if someone is still watching me from a shadow I haven't noticed yet. The house that threw a fake party. I moved to a quiet suburban neighborhood in Georgia last year, feeling lucky to finally buy my first home. The houses were spaced out, and everything seemed normal, except for the guy on my left. His name was Damon. He was young, but he lived like a ghost. I never saw him leave. His car never moved, and he never even ordered takeout. One Wednesday night at 2 a.m., I woke up to loud music. I looked out and saw 7 cars lined up in Damon's driveway. It looked like a full-blown party, which was weird since he told me he preferred to keep to himself. I walked over to ask him to turn it down, but when I knocked, the front door just swung open. I stepped inside and froze. The living room was empty. No people, no drinks, just a pile of shoes in the foyer. Then I really listened to the music. It wasn't a song. It was a literal recording of people laughing, yelling, and clinking glasses. The entire party was fake. Why would someone go to such lengths to pretend they were having a party? I followed the faint light down to the basement. I heard a heavy, rhythmic grinding sound like machinery. I peeked through a crack in the door and saw 3 older men in heavy-duty work clothes, protective goggles, and thick rubber gloves. Then the smell hit me, an overwhelming chemical stench of bleach. My stomach dropped. I felt like my life was in danger. Suddenly, the light dimmed as if someone had shut a door behind me. I didn't wait. I sprinted up the stairs and burst out the front door. From my office window, I watched as 8 men poured out of Damon's house, scanning the yard and the street, looking for whoever had been snooping. Damon wasn't with them. The next morning, every car was gone. Damon never came back. It's been months, and his grass is getting long, with a pile of untouched packages at his door. No one in the neighborhood remembers hearing a party that night. I'm left wondering if I stumbled into some huge conspiracy, and what exactly they were cleaning up in that basement with all that bleach.